Welcome to the Real Life Planning video podcast. I'm Cynthia Meyer with Real Life Planning, and this is episode 26, College Planning for Real Estate Investors. And today we've got the expert in this topic. Her name is Rynda Wilk, and she's the founder of 21 Finance. You can find her online at 21finance.xyz. We used to work together for many years in employee benefits and financial wellness programs, and she's one of the smartest people I know. So thanks for coming on, Rynda.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Cynthia.
So tell us what's important to know about you.
I have dedicated the past, 10 years of my life or so to helping families make better financial decisions. And as part of that journey, I came to realize that getting through college without a ton of debt was one of the hardest that families face these days. And so that's why I've chosen to go down that path and specialize in that area. So I can hopefully keep more students out of a detrimental financial situation in the future.
I think that's wonderful. I know I personally got out of school with a fair amount of student loans, and it took me a long time to pay them off. I didn't finish until I was in my 30s. And I've noticed that not having a large amount of student debt when you get out of school, right, helps you get started faster. It helps you buy a home faster or gives you the freedom to start a business. As someone who works with real estate entrepreneurs, right, the goal is to start building as soon as possible. Let's talk a little bit about what you do every day, how people find a school to go to where they're not going to be drowning in debt afterwards.
The biggest way that you can help yourself is to shop for the right schools for situation. And for any person who's recently gone through the journey of finding the right school for their student, myself included as well, Cynthia, I think it is really hard to find information online that fits your situation. You get a lot of generalities when you Google these topics, but there are some software programs out there that are helpful. The one that I use is College Aid Pro. And
that's a good piece of software. Yeah.
And it's a fantastic tool that really gives you, it takes all your personal information, your students' academic information, financial information, and then it can help you see, hey, how much is each institution likely to cost me personally or my student. So that's a huge part of the process of keeping the cost down. And then there's just a general understanding of how things work, which it's a confusing process.
Yes. Yeah. For those people that have seniors right now, your senior may be in the thick of it, right? They're applying to schools and they're going to be evaluating offers in a couple of months unless they applied early action somewhere. They may want to go to a school that isn't going to give them the best deal, right? Anybody that's got someone in high school, if they've got a college-bound child, or if they have a child that's looking for some kind of post-secondary education, this is a big topic right now. So let's dive in a little bit to how this specifically affects the real estate investor or somebody that owns properties directly. If you don't mind, I'll just ask you some questions and you can tell us how we should be thinking about this in terms of the major financial aid implications. How are our homes treated on the FAFSA for financial aid purposes?
When you're talking FAFSA, that's strictly the federal form. A lot of schools use it. The FAFSA does not include your personal home equity in their calculations. So that's good to know. So if you have a lot of equity, it's not going to count against you on the FAFSA. It's also good to know what kind of schools you're looking at. There's also the CSS profile, which is a different financial aid form, mostly used
more private school oriented, right? Yeah.
And especially like the elite private schools, the smaller privates don't use it. They do ask for home equity information for your personal residence. And the tricky part is it may or may not be used depending on the schools you're looking at. The CSS profile is a whole different ballgame, but if you're looking at mostly in-state schools or state institutions of any state and some privates, mostly going to be worried about the FAFSA, and you don't have to worry about your home residence. CSS profile individual by the school, how that hey, we're not going to count it when we're looking at giving financial aid. Other schools will cap the amount of equity in your primary residence to something like your 1 year annual salary, or it might be a multiple of your annual salary. they can do it any way they want to, really. So it's good to know what kind of schools you're looking at.
So the bottom line takeaway here is that if you're applying to a fancy, expensive private school, they probably are going to count the equity in your home. So if you come from a state like New Jersey or New York or Connecticut or Texas, for example, where there have been a huge increase in home prices and folks do have a lot of equity in their houses, this could be detrimental to your child receiving financial aid.
It could.
Yeah. So what about rental properties? Rental properties are a business, right? So I would expect that, in my experience, rental property is just treated like any other business asset. Is that right?
That is right. And on the FAFSA, it's a little over 5% of the value, the equity that you have in a rental property or any kind of investment property would be added to your expected family contribution.
Right. And the tricky thing for real estate investors, of course, is we all know you can't just slice off 5% of your rental property and spend it on college, right? So what do people do if they have a lot of rentals, for example, but they don't necessarily have the liquidity to pay a large bill?
One thing that you can do is use that as a factor in an appeals process. If most of your investment, let's say, if you didn't have the rental properties, that your expected family contribution would be a lot lower, then you can use that once you've been accepted at a school and you've been offered a package. You can go back to them and say, hey, I know you offer me this much. Thank you very much. I'm very interested in your school. However, I just want to point out that my situation on paper maybe doesn't match my actual cash flow situation very well. This is going to be a real hardship on my family if we have to pay this much. And I'd like to ask for an additional scholarship or aid package of X amount. Try to see if they'll offer you some more money to attend their school. It's not always going to work. There's no guarantees with that process. It's not unusual at all for schools to come back with it.
Especially in this environment. We both had seniors last year, and your son's gone off to college, and my daughter decided to take a gap year. But I found, I don't know if this happened to you, but I found during this process that especially some of the private schools, they were really trying to recruit her in a way that I hadn't seen before with other families in my neighborhood. So I think attendance at more expensive schools is down a little bit. Is that correct?
I hear of attendance being down at a lot of schools, even in college down the road.
Really? Okay.
I'm not sure what that's all about, because the year after, let's say 2021, applications were up. That year, I think a lot of people had decided not to go during COVID because they weren't going to be able to go on campus and stuff the next year. That kind of dynamic was at play, but I'm not sure why the applications are down now.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what the research shows on that. Certainly in my daughter's class, there were a larger number of kids than usual that decided to defer for a year. Still, most kids went straight on to college, but she and several of her friends decided to take a gap year and work. They just felt like they had missed out on that experience of all those things that you do growing up in high school. And I wanted to take a little more time to do that before they went to school. So one of the things that we've talked about and did a blog post about earlier in the year is ways that you can think about real estate as a real estate investor, ways that you can think about setting up housing for your students. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the most expensive parts of going to school, people don't actually realize, is not always the tuition, it's the housing and the meal packages. If you are a real estate investor and this is something that you do anyway, you're interested in, one way to think about saving money on college is to purchase a condo or some near campus housing for your student to live in, maybe have some to help pay the rent, then your cost at that location, then do what you want to with it when they're done with school. If it's a good time for you to sell and get your money back, fine. If you want to hang on to it, if it's a good,
keep running it as student housing. Yeah.
You're not just sinking rent money into the housing at school.
Yeah. So that's a student house hacking. I really like that idea. I met several years ago someone who at the time was working for my financial planner network, the XY Planning Network. And he had bought a house hack for himself when he was going to university. It just turned out so well that just kept buying student housing. So at a relatively young age, had more doors than I did at the time. So it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I will say my son is in school up in Erie, Pennsylvania. The housing in general there is, at least where he's at, is very inexpensive. Some of his on his water polo team are renting a home and they all pay $400 a piece. I know how much the similar houses cost in that area. So that's a pretty good deal for whoever owns that house.
Sounds like an opportunity for you and your husband. One of the things that we often see as financial planners is that people often don't think about college planning topics until their child is applying to schools. But when should somebody be thinking about college planning? When's the optimum time to do it?
You want to start at the beginning of high school, the latest. Obviously, start saving much, much earlier than that. I think a lot of people do or try to, but also it's a time of life when your expenses in general are growing. And so it's not always easy for every family to put away however much every month or something like that. It's good to start thinking about it freshman year. And one important year that you want to really be aware of is the second semester of sophomore year. That's the look back year for your income on your financial aid forms. So that's the asking for your tax information. So if you can avoid anything that would temporarily raise your income, such as doing a Roth conversion or something like that, that
selling your property and not doing a 1031 exchange, taking a big bonus.
Yes, anything like that in that year, avoid afterwards. Let's just say if you are in a position where you really need to do something, like that's another appeals item. Let's say you really need to sell a property and for whatever your personal reasons, you're not going to do a 1030. That's something you can throw in as an appeal item. Hey, this was just a one-off thing. This is not normal.
I find it in this busy age, we all have a tsunami of information that's coming at us all the time. People often think that's too much time or that's too much effort. But I would invite them to think about this planning could pay off for you with tens of thousands of dollars in potential return. It's definitely worth the hours that you would spend on working on a college planning, because it could, we're talking about 5 figures or maybe even 6, depending on if you do it right. So it's worth it, right? It's not just like forgetting to send in the $5 rebate when you buy your contact lenses or something. This has a pretty big bang for the buck.
Yeah. And on that note, back to the schools that require the CSS about earlier and how they can view home equity differently. You might be looking at 2 schools that are both phenomenal. They both fit your student, but one of them might look much more favorably at your home equity than the other. They might start with the same sticker price. Say they're both $80,000 a year,
which is just ridiculous when you think about it.
Common.
Yeah.
As a starting point, one of them might actually be tens of thousands of dollars a year less expensive. So if you know that up front, hey, I should apply to that school in addition to the others. If you go to the website mycap.collegeaidpro.com, you can enter information and get 3 school specific reports for free. Not paying anything, actually. They will give you like a good idea, like what those 3 schools would cost you. Most likely, no one can say for sure what kind of aid package you're going to. They've got it pretty dialed in to where it's a really good estimate to use when you're doing your research.
All right, that's super helpful. We'll put that in the show notes. So Rynda, just taking a step back here, since you've started your business, families who are going through the college planning process, what are you most curious about right now? What are you trying to learn?
I am trying to learn how I can best help families who have already, before they come to me, said, you know what, we really want our student to go to this school.
A legacy or some kind of prestigious school.
because those are the families that have the hardest time. If that school doesn't happen to be one that's affordable for them, it's a really hard emotional journey to back away from that and see, hey, what else is there out there that's similar? And so I want to be able to help them do that and see what the future would be like for them down the path that they really want to go down versus maybe a more affordable option. Sometimes the affordable option, even if it's not what you have your heart set on, might be a lot easier for you down the road.
Yeah.
For years.
What are some other resources that people could read or listen to learn more about college planning strategies?
Yeah, so I have blogs and articles on my website, 21finance.xyz, and I try to really get specific about the topics that I choose to write about so that you can take some solid action steps when you're done. There are a lot of good sites out there, especially if your student is applying for a school that requires a CSS profile. Website is an excellent resource for that. And College Aid Pro also has a lot of really good information on their website. There are some great Facebook groups as well, especially if you're wanting to send your student to an in-state school. I know in our area, we had a Facebook group just dedicated to Central Florida schools. There was an expert that was moderating and leading that group, and it's fantastic because she literally would answer the most specific of questions about applying for and getting into those schools. So you might have something in your area.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
The best advice I have gotten was just to do the shopping, to keep looking and not get fixated on one school. I used that. I was able to work with my son and help him do that as well. It really worked out well for him and for us.
That's wonderful. So where can we find you online, Rynda?
The easiest place to find me is on my website, 21finance.xyz. I am also on Facebook at Rynda Wilk.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much for having this conversation today. We've got more broken down in a blog post, which we'll also link to in the show notes. And you know where to find her if you've got a question for her. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please go ahead and subscribe to the Real Life Planning channel and get notice of future episodes, and send us an email at podcast@reallifeplanning.com if you've got a suggestion or topic. Thanks, Rynda.
Thank you, Cynthia.